Hi, hello, my name's Ollie Bliss and this is my channel Bookdraw. For those who don't know, I enjoy looking at queer fiction and occasionally I create images out of it. Today I'm doing a wrap up from June. I recognise that we're like over halfway into July. And apologies for basically not being more on it in terms of uploading content. I am going through some significant life changes right now. Just to give you a little bit of an update, I am going to be leaving Manchester and I am going to be leaving my job, and that is going to be happening really, really soon. I will be doing these things by September. My partner, Craig, has got a new job and we are going to be moving to an entirely different area called Worcester, which is further south of England, but it's also closer to where my parents are. I also have some old high school friends who are living around that area, so it's a really good move for us, but it's also terrifying because I've not got a job set up for myself, so I need to get on that. And also because with my current job, there's a lot of events which are happening right now, and there's also a big program of work which I'm heavily involved in, which is very exciting. So it's all happening in the real world right now, which has meant I've had very little spare time for the virtual bookish world instead. Anyway, to discuss the books which I have read in the month of May, I wanted to start off Virginia Woolf's Room of One's Own. Now, I did this as a buddy read with wonderful Joe and Milena, who are two incredibly joyous people to do this with. And I think we made this experience so much richer for doing it as a kind of collaborative read together, because we had the ideas and themes which we were put into this, and we broke them down into the sections, and we really, really discussed the themes within them. And I think it had a bit of an impact on all of us in terms of how we see the rights of women right now and are able to compare it to the rights of women previously, because this is nearly 100 years old. It's not quite there yet. It's got a little bit of time left. I think it was I want to say 1928, I think it was written, sometime sort of around there. Yeah, first published in 1928. But we're coming up to that kind of centenary, so it's really interesting to read on it from a state of where we are. And she talks about things like how she would hope that in future women would be able to drive their own car freely. And if you think internationally, in Saudi Arabia, that's only just recently happened. So in terms of how we've made these big distances, and also how in some areas some distance still hasn't fully happened and that change hasn't been fully realised. But she's basically arguing for the opportunity for women to have the opportunity, predominantly to have the space to create and write. And she talks and outlines all the kind of barriers which are set in place systemically against women, which make it really difficult for them to contribute, and how there is a gender divide in terms of roles, but also in terms of access to education and even things like being able to go to the library. And she really eloquently summarizes all these, and in some places she really deviates massively and she just kind of goes on these big tangents, and we refer to them lovingly as kind of Woolfy moments. And we ended up having Woolfy moments ourselves, where we started our own kind of stream of consciousness and just kind of get into these meandering modes of thought. And she, the way she does it is so nice in terms of you are taken on a journey with her, and you are following a flow. And sometimes you're kind of okay, where's the flow going? But she does kind of eventually bring it back to the main thrust of the argument. But for something that's so slim and slight, she is able to pack so many different thoughts. And in terms of that kind of that progression of thought, particularly when you can think about the context of when she was writing and are able to compare it directly to today, this is a really interesting read for right now, I'd say. And I think that's something that we all kind of collectively reflected on. So then I went on holiday and had a wonderful time, and I got to read quite a few books, which was delightful. And I won't necessarily be able to talk all of these. I think I might spill some over into July, but we'll see. Anyway, the first book which I want to discuss is Interment. Now, Interment is written by Samira, Ahmed, and it was just so good. Such a good book. This is like the Hitchhiker's Guide to revolt and protest, and in terms of this is such a neat little package in terms of explaining these are all the potential issues that you may face if you are being put in a vulnerable position where all your rights are being stripped away from you. This is how you deal with an unfathomable situation where all your kind of power and liberty is taken away from you, and you are being put in a position where you are trying to navigate that space and find a way forward where you can claim back some of those rights. I would, as a criticism to this book, I'd say it's ever so slightly naive in the way that this is targeted and positioned towards a more YA, but it is incredibly hopeful, and it does really signpost the reader to a lot of materials and resources. It highlights different previous narratives. It talks about things like Anne Frank and Anonymous as an activist group, but it's just a really successful roadmap into talking about taking all those steps apart where you are stripped of all those rights, you're stripped of everything that you know around you, or you're put into this position. What do you do? So Interment, sorry, it's about Layla, who this is a kind of 15 minutes into the future where it kind of is essentially saying, what if Trump is able to continue in the direction of travel, and all Muslims are kind of put in internment camps? What would this look like? And it's kind of an imagined future from Layla's perspective. What I thought part of this book was really interesting is that it actually also looks at that kind of internal struggle and internal fight that systems will use to actually put you against different groups of people. So it actually kind of breaks up the little internment camps between different religious sects so that they kind of other each other, and then there's this kind of frosty ambivalence between each of them. Layla is put into a position where she starts speaking out to the internment and the kind of conditions that she's in. Other people around her who are part of different groups start then seeing her as the protester, the one who's creating trouble for everyone, and then the system starts having an impact on the wider community. So they collectively kind of bring her into line. So it really outlines the kind of strategies which are used to ensure that everyone adopts a position of being placid and dominated by those in that position of power. But what this is good at doing is looking at those different opportunities which are there to change that position and change that narrative. If you can't identify someone to ally with internally, how do you get your messages out to wider networks? And the realization that people, even in positions of power and control, they are still people, and some of those people might not actually fully subscribe to what is being dictated outwardly. But what I felt like there was a bit missing in this, which doesn't look at dehumanization, which I think is a really important factor within narratives around when a group of people are marginalized further and perceived as less than, in order for the ability to take control over them and treat them in a certain way where they become a prisoner effectively. That happens through dehumanization, and I don't think this book really grappled with that element enough, which I think is a bit of a missed opportunity. But this was really good at kind of signposting certain opportunities that there are, particularly with things that are empowering in terms of the use of social media, and how that can really be a weapon against these controlling, dominant figures in our society who try and assert themselves on mass groups, and how, as a mass, we have a collective power, but you need a united voice, which is a really positive narrative to kind of push forward and say that we all need to be allies with each other if we are ever going to be able to stand up to these positions of major power. So just on a lot of different levels, I really massively loved this book. And then I wanted something completely different and fluffy. So this is called Something Like Summer, which is by J. Bell. This is actually independently published, but this is brilliant. I really enjoyed this. And what I didn't know is this is actually part of the series, which takes some of the characters and shows them in a different way from different lens through the different seasons, which I thought was very cool, and it makes me want to pick up and read the other ones. But in a nutshell, this is following a lead character called Benjamin, and he's a little bit obsessed with another guy called Tim. It's taken from 3 different periods in their life. So it starts from 1996, and then it goes into 1999, and then 2003. Just had to check. And that is quite unusual, I think, and something quite helpful and interesting within that, and something quite relatable, I think, because I think we're kind of probably he's a little bit older than me as a writer, but in terms of being able to lean into those elements of a historic context that was happening around you, how it kind of felt to be a person at those times. And what I didn't realize about this is this book has actually been converted into a film, which you can go watch.
It's him.
Who?
Tim Wyman. Blue Shoes.
That ass is way above standard. Blue Shoes is the guy you've been stalking all summer?
They call it admiring from afar.
You've been admiring from afar every day and from not so afar.
Hey, watch out! Gosh! Oh my God. What is your problem? I don't know. I'm a klutz. Oh, your house is super close if we cut through those trees. My house? Yeah. Okay, let's go.
So I'd encourage people to go check that out. I'm certainly going to check that out. I'm interested in how this translates into a film, particularly as it goes through those 3 different stages. But I was surprised by, as a book, the direction that it took as it went through those different time periods, and how it discussed the kind of constructs of relationships, and how there can be different types of loving relationships. I thought it handled those elements really well. The next one I want to talk to you is The Overstory by Richard Powers. So this one I actually did as an audiobook. I'd been particularly drawn into this book by a review which was connected to Alex from Whatpageareyouon and Leo from Leo's Book of Life. They were both really complimentary about this particular book, and I was drawn in and sold basically by them. I have really mixed feelings about this book. Firstly, because this book is about trees, I kind of feel like, and I feel quite morally superior because I listened to it on audiobook. But this is a really long book, in audio, I think it was either 21 or 23 hours, and I had seen the physical copies of it, and it is a massive chunkster of a book, and I'm just thinking, Richard Powers is talking about, oh, let's all save the trees, as he's kind of, literally blending them all up, turning them into mush, and producing all these books and profiteering out of them. As a kind of visual, I couldn't stop myself from repeatedly thinking that. So I did, at times, struggle with some of the ever so slightly worthy, lecherous tones which came through the book. And I feel bad for saying that, because all the messages on it are really necessary, really crucial, and I think this book is really good at kind of making you rethink about your relationship with the natural world around you and our relationship with trees, and just make us more conscious of those things. But this is a very politically soft move, and it's taken from a perspective, I feel like, of the trees. It's broken up into these 4 sections, which were, oh God, what were they? Roots, trunk, crown, and seeds, which is also a useful framework to kind of position where there are these, I think it's 9 characters, and because you only get kind of vignettes into their life, but they cross over through to each other, and they basically form this overstory, which you get a sense of through reading the whole book. But it did feel like a kind of let's all sit down and discuss trees, and take a really long time about it. And I guess it's because maybe I am in a position where I'm like, let's get to the point, let's get to the action, let's do the action, let's deliver the output, let's make this happen. And this is really trying to resist from that, and it's trying to make you think slower, and it's actually trying to make you think in a different way and think on a more deeper way about the impact of our actions. But I was also kind of like, you could have made this point at about a third of the book, and you might have been able to directly impact them on a more meaningful basis, which actually created a change. What I did like is the relationship to the people's characters and their overarching connection to the story. So to give a little example of this, I'll just hone in on a couple of characters and qualities of them as in their physicality and who they were and what happened to them kind of had a kind of direct link to, I think, some of the themes within the book. So, for example, Nile Metha, who's someone who's physically paralyzed and ends up creating these incredible virtual reality worlds and is really successful on that and has this kind of grander notion about how we should be looking at systems in our physical world and looking for more sustainable ways of being as a kind of general overview, from a point of a very consumer-driven game where you basically consume stuff, you produce stuff, and then you grow new stuff, and then you just kind of expand out like a virus. And he was trying to create a different narrative within a game which was more collaborative and about growing more sustainable ways of living. And I felt like the theme within that, which was about how we are physically disconnected to our reality around us. And then you've got Patty Westerford, or Patricia, and she has a physical deformity in her inner ear, which makes her struggle with hearing, or I can't remember if she's partially or fully deaf. But she has this different relationship with trees, and she kind of is instrumental in creating a change in understanding how trees connect to each other through the air and through the chemical releases and also through the networks within their trees. And it's about her listening on a different frequency or different way, or being more in tune with trees on their terms in a different way, and how we are absent-minded and deaf to the needs of trees in order for this kind of sustainable change. You've also got Douglas, and he subscribes to the Stanford prison experiment. So I learnt about the Zimbardo study through psychology A-level, but basically it was an experiment that was about, I think it was supposed to last like 2 weeks, and it cut short because they divided people between prisoners and like the authority position. And those in the authority position basically took their power, ran with it, and they had to cut it short because of the conditions that they were putting the prisoners in. Now, this kind of, it then reflects later on in his life as he becomes a part of a logging company, and he's contributing to deforestation. And I felt like that was his apathy, or his lack of activism, or just awareness and change and consciousness that led to him contributing to a system of destruction. So I felt like the characters were carefully considered and crafted and lead into these overarching wider themes of the book, and I did think it was quite successful in doing those things. Could have done it a different way in half the time. That's ultimately how I feel, and I do feel quite bad for thinking that way. I just don't think this was the right vehicle for creating change, and I think this is actually quite harmful to a lot of trees. I would love to know your thoughts on the things that I've said on this one, though, because I do think it's a very interesting book, and I think I am at risk of being really dismissive of a really important book, but that's kind of just how I feel about the book. The next one which I read was The Little Mermaid, which is by Hans Christian Andersen, and I actually read this because of a review that Anne from Book Your Imagination did, which is just really superb, well worth a watch. And because I had no idea about Hans Christian Andersen possibly being bisexual and having these very romantic feelings towards a man in his life who ended up going with a woman, but there's lots of parallels within this book. It's a really short, sweet read. I also then, which I will talk about in a future video, attended the Bradford Literature Festival and listened to a lecture delivered by Jen Campbell, which was all about the history of fairy tales. And she also included this as an example, but it's interesting to actually read the fairy tale of it, and it's actually quite an interesting read, particularly when you compare it to the Disney version, which is nothing like it. So those are all the ones which I want to talk about today, because basically I did read a little bit more, but I'll spill those ones over into July, I think, because I've probably gone on enough right now. But I had a really enjoyable, wonderful reading month, got through some really good chunksters, and have been quite excited by the books that I've read. I would also like to apologise to everybody else within the community where I've just not been watching videos right now. It's just because I've had a lot on. And for those of people who enjoy just commenting and getting involved, please comment and say hi to me. I've missed chatting to you, and I will talk to you in the comments below. I hope you are all well and good, and I will see you all again real soon. Okay, take care. Bye.